strategy and finance and business operations.
But the things that actually changed how we operate, they weren't buzzwords or balance sheets. They were actually mental frameworks.
These 3 frameworks that we're going to talk about today rewired how we think about business and also our personal life.
These are tools we still use today to make decisions faster, build smarter, and to just live better lives.
I'm Cherie.
I'm Jean.
And we're the Tiger Sisters.
Today, we're sharing 3 of the 6 most important tools taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And for each of these, we're going to do 2 things, just like we would for a real case study at Harvard Business School or the Stanford GSB. The first thing is that we're going to talk through a real life example of a company so that we can bring the framework to life for you. The second thing is that we're going to go through a mini exercise so that we can actually practice what we learned through the framework as we go through the podcast.
Let's dive into it.
Okay, so the first framework is design thinking. Cherie, tell us about design thinking.
So design thinking was invented at Stanford's D School, the design school, and it's completely reshaped how many companies, especially tech companies, approach problem solving.
So the whole concept of design thinking really took off with this company called IDEO, which is a famous design company. And they're famous for a lot of things. I think one of the things that people know them for is that they designed the original Apple mouse, which is kind of hilarious. Iconic. And the whole big idea behind design thinking is that instead of designing around what you think the problem is, you need to design around what the user actually needs.
And I love design thinking because it literally works for any type of problem, whether you're at Google or you're at the Gates Foundation, for example.
We used it all the time at work. And the whole concept is that it's not at all about being a designer. It's actually about really empathizing with what the user wants and what the user needs so that you deeply understand them. And then you can start to build from that place of empathy and understanding. And like once we actually get into the sort of details of how the framework works, you'll see that it makes a huge difference. And the reality of it is that most products fail not because they're badly built, but because they're actually solving the wrong problem.
And here's how it works. There are 5 steps. The first step is to empathize and talk to your users, understand them and understand what's frustrating them.
This is like a whole function now at tech companies. There's this whole sort of group called user researchers, and this is what they do like all day long. It's like so baked into the tech building sort of like process now.
The second is to define what's actually the root problem here. The third is to ideate. This is to brainstorm and don't censor yourself. No idea is too crazy or too out there. The fourth is to prototype. Build a scrappy, low-stakes version of what you think the solution could be. And fifth is to test. Put this in front of users and watch how they react. Watch how they behave and what they do, not just what they say.
I can share an example from my own experience, which is that when I was working at Snapchat, one of the things we were doing is working on building out augmented reality shopping. And the first sort of vertical that we focused on was beauty. So the idea was that we would use augmented reality to sort of like help you shop and decide what sort of like lipsticks or mascara or blush, etc., that you should buy. And the idea is that you would try it on through Snapchat. So before we actually did that, we went to a beauty store on out in LA on Abbot Kinney and spent an entire afternoon there just like watching people interact in the beauty store and like seeing how they decided what to buy and like talking to them and asking them about their process of like, how do you decide what you need for beauty? Like, how do you, what do you look for when you're trying these on in store? And then using that was basically the entire sort of like user interview section so that we could really understand what their needs were, like how important being in store was versus were they really just trying to see it like on their skin and compare the color, or was it really important for them to actually be in person?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, and that part was really fun. So that's what I was saying is that like, doing the sort of user research is actually not just very enlightening. I think as a builder and a builder of products, it's actually a really fun part of the whole process.
Totally. And it sounds like there was a lot of empathizing you need to do and a lot of observation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the mini exercise for this section is to pick one problem in your life where you feel kind of stuck, and then think through the 5 steps of design thinking. Now ask yourself, the person that I'm designing for, what are they afraid of? What are they needing? And how can I better and more deeply understand them? It might be your boss, your partner, or your customer. First, write down all of their feelings first and things that you can observe before brainstorming any solutions. And next is framework 2, which is test and learn. Jean, can you tell us about this?
Yes. Okay. I love this one. Test and learn is a framework, but it's also very much just an entire mindset. This framework is taught in Stanford's Startup Garage, and it's also now in a book called Lean Startup. The whole point of this is to stop waiting to be perfect, to just start trying things and being scrappy.
And for most students, and honestly most people, this is a giant wake-up call because everyone is so used to being perfect and thinking about the strategy instead of just going out, putting out something scrappy and just doing it and trying it.
And the biggest lesson here, which is kind of a little bit controversial, is that a lot of times your really well thought out business plan is nothing more than a fantasy. And the main takeaway from this framework is that your MVP, or what's called the minimum viable product, is what actually teaches you everything you need to learn to build out your product.
And many times when you put your MVP out there and you get a response from your customers, your business plan will definitely have to pivot and change.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a good example of this is our own experience.
Well, Jean and I, about a year ago, developed a business plan for Tiger Sisters, and it was a pitch deck, basically. And the idea was that Tiger Sisters was going to be a reality TV show. But we had a little MVP. We tested things out. We talked to a lot of people, gathered data. And soon we realized this was not the right time or the right environment, macro environment to start that idea. And so that business idea, for the most part, that strategy went out the window. And now we have a pivot of that idea, which is Tiger Sisters, the podcast, which is what you're watching and listening to right now.
Yeah, and I would say the MVP, like if you guys go back to watch our first few episodes, they were very MVP. First of all, we just had one camera. We were sitting at the kitchen table. We had way worse mics. We didn't have these awesome mic flags. Like it was just everything about it was much lower quality. But the whole concept was like, we think we have, good ideas and lessons and conversations that are important to put out there. And I think people will really love to sort of like be a part of this community and conversation. So let's just put it out there, even if the actual like quality of the video is not as high as other podcasts or as high as we could make it.
Which honestly was okay to start with because it totally worked. I think we were still delivering value. The information that we were putting out there it sounds like really helpful, and we read every single comment and we know the quality had to improve because you guys were like, the microphones suck, and we're like, we know, we're trying to do better. Yeah. But everything has been test and learn for the last 9 months for us on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess the whole concept, like bringing it back to MVP or minimum viable product, is that if we were waiting and like put all this effort into making the perfect set and like having the perfect equipment and having like all the perfect angles before we put out the first one, it would have been, I think, much slower to actually get information and know what to do, because it would have taken so much longer for those sort of startup costs versus just putting something out there and then reacting to the market.
Yeah. Basically seeing how you guys react to our videos.
Yeah. Some other ways that other companies have done it in the past is even more MVP. So like a really good example of this is Dropbox. So the way they started their MVP is that they built 0 product. They literally made a 3-minute marketing video describing how Dropbox would work, and they released it. And in that one day, they got 75,000 signups for it. So based on that, they were like, oh shit, people really want our product. Like, let's actually build it out.
And the online retailer Zappos did the exact same. They didn't start out by having a fulfillment center. They bought shoes at a local store and shipped them manually just to test out to see if people would purchase them online.
I thought of another example. Another one that is pretty well known and a little bit more recent is ClassPass, which when they first launched and they were sort of like matching people up to different classes, everyone thought it was, obviously some sort of like automated system, but in reality, it was just a spreadsheet. And the people who worked at ClassPass manually signing people up for those classes on the back end. There was no technology actually behind it. They were just like, okay, let's see if this concept even works, and let's, do it manually ourselves and pay for it ourselves.
And a fourth example that I just have top of mind for me is with DoorDash. It's the DoorDash lore with Tony Xu, the founder, one of the founders. And how DoorDash started was that they just put up a website. I think it was called like Palo Alto Delivery. It was like there were a bunch of Stanford students. They would take in an order on the phone. If anyone called in and made like a food order, the DoorDash co-founders would then make the order themselves at the restaurant and go pick it up and then deliver it themselves. And it was super manual in the beginning, but they saw that there was proof of concept there.
Yeah, same idea. All right, now on to the mini exercise. And I think you guys know what it's going to be. So basically, think of one problem that you've been thinking through and you haven't sort of tackled yet. And now think of the simplest way you can test it out. Maybe it's a Google form, maybe it's an Instagram post, maybe it's a text message, and just do it. And that's all it takes to get your first learning. And then tell us in the comments what you guys do.
And honestly, the answer or the clarity that you're looking for is probably hiding behind one very simple test. And if you wait for the perfect moment or the most opportune moment, likely someone scrappier will beat you to it.
Okay, Sheree, now let's move on to framework 3. It's reversible versus irreversible decisions. Take it away.
Okay, let's talk about decisions and decision making. This one is pretty famous and called the Bezos framework, and it's a little bit spicy because supposedly this is what they use at Amazon.
And it all stems from this infamous memo that Jeff Bezos wrote a million years ago, which was about type 1 versus type 2 decision making, where type 1 is irreversible and then type 2 is reversible.
And the gist is that people usually treat every decision like they're exactly the same, that they're all irreversible decisions. And what that does is that makes decision making a lot slower. And that's actually what kills innovation.
Okay, so just to review, type 1 decisions are the irreversible ones. These are the ones where you have to think very slowly about it, have a strategy, and think about the long-term effects. So move slowly here. And then type 2 is reversible. These are ones that you should experiment on and move quickly on.
So important decisions should be type 1. They should be irreversible, like hiring the first engineer, the first person on your team. That's pretty important and you need to get that right. So that would be an irreversible decision. Experimenting with something on your website, changing the color of a button, that's type 2. That's reversible. You don't have to give those type of decisions as much brain power because you can just experiment, test and learn and move on.
Yeah. And I can think of, aside from Amazon, like thinking about my own experience, I feel like entire companies are based on the premise of type 1 versus type 2 decisions. So for example, when I worked at Zynga and I worked on Farmville the whole time, like all different iterations of Farmville, we were obsessed with type 2 decisions because we experimented on everything. So like every single thing you ever saw on the screen in Farmville, and this is true for so many like websites and games that you see and you interact with nowadays, was tested. So whether the button was like a total like rectangle with sharp edges versus a button with rounded edges, we test that. So that's like that sounds like a throwaway decision, but things like that would actually make a difference. And we could move really quickly on just testing them all the time and not worry too much about like an irreversible outcome, basically.
Okay, so it's time for the mini exercise. We want you to make a list of all the decisions that you have to make. They could be big ones, they could be small ones. And next, we want you to sort them into type 1 irreversible or type 2 reversible decisions. And for the decisions that are reversible on your list, go and try to test one of them out today. Make a small, like, test and learn MVP and see what results you get.
I think my main takeaway from this framework is that doing things at speed is a skill, but also knowing what deserves speed versus deserves, a lot of intentful thinking, that's strategy.
Startups die not necessarily from bad decisions, but from slow ones. So those are the first 3 mental operating systems that I learned while at Stanford. The first is design thinking. The second is test and learn. And the third is irreversible versus reversible decisions.
And these aren't just frameworks that you use to build decks or sort of like do inane busy work. These are actually tools that we use every single day in our lives to build faster, to launch, and to get unstuck. And I would say not just in work, but also in sort of like your everyday decision making for things outside of work.
For example, reversible decision versus irreversible decision. Getting a divorce. Put it into a certain bucket. Is it reversible? Is it not reversible? Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not.
It's funny. Yeah. It's like dating versus getting married.
What do you mean?
Like dating is a reversible decision. Like you could just be dating and then break up.
Yeah.
Or if you're married, then you're connected by the law.
It's harder to break up if you are married because there are a lot more legal loopholes.